The assignment. The Celestial Institute for Sentient Studies orbited the gas giant Tavanner, its sleek crystalline towers shimmering in violet sunlight. Within its grand amphitheater, over 200 alien students from dozens of worlds gathered, their eyes, stalks, or photoreceptive nodes fixed on the towering form of Professor Threnak. He stood rigid at the center dais, his segmented body encased in polished chitin, antennae twitching with precise authority. "Today," he announced, voice translated into hundreds of tongues via neural uplink, "you begin your final observation project. Each team will study one sapient species, its biology, dietary resilience, and toxin resistance thresholds." A subtle murmur rippled through the students. This was no ordinary lab work. This was real-world xenoscience. Beside Threnak, a hollow screen flared to life, displaying a long, ominous list labeled Class V toxic substances, ingestion lethal to 95% of known species. The alien students leaned in, chittering and blinking as entries scrolled past. Caffeine, ethanol, capsaicin, acetaldehyde, theobromine, sodium chloride in high quantities. "These," Threnak said, his mandibles clicking, "are known death agents. You will monitor your assigned species' interaction with them. Document everything, particularly any acts of ingestion." A shiver passed through Raxic, a spindly insectoid student whose thorax quivered with anticipation. His team had been randomly assigned a primitive class, 3 species from a recently contacted biosphere, Homo sapiens. Earthlings. Beside him, his project partner, Ashari, an aquatic gelatinous being wrapped in a moisture suit, looked alarmed. "Humans," she whispered through her gilcom. "They're still transitioning out of fossil fuel dependence. What could they possibly teach us?" Raxic didn't answer. His mandibles were twitching as he stared at the list. Something wasn't right. The lights dimmed. A playback began. On screen, a grainy recording showed a human in a brightly lit kitchen. He was humming to himself while cooking. The meal, to Raxic's horror, included fried, capsaicin-rich vegetables, preserved animal flesh treated with sodium nitrate, and a bubbling beverage that chemical analysis marked as 90% carbonic acid and caffeine solution. The human sat down. He smiled and began eating. The class erupted in startled noise. One bird-like student fainted, feathers puffing in shock. "Pause it," Threnak barked. The screen froze on the human mid-bite, eyes closed in what appeared to be pleasure. "Let me clarify," the professor said slowly. "This footage is not mislabeled. That is capsaicin. That is ethanol. And yes, that is cheese." Eshari made a wet, gurgling noise. "Cheese? Isn't that fermented cow secretion?" "Correct," Threnak replied with a grim nod. "Intentionally decomposed protein. They eat rot," Raxic asked, horrified and fascinated. "They cultivate it," Threnak corrected, "sometimes with live bacteria." Silence. On screen, the human reached for a hot red pepper, grinning directly at the camera as he bit into it. The display's toxin sensor spiked. "He should be convulsing," Ashari murmured. "That dosage would kill a Garvathian." Instead, the human laughed and shouted something the translator rendered as, "WO, that's the good pain." Raxic leaned closer to the screen, his curiosity overpowering his revulsion. "Professor, how are they not dead?" Threnak sighed. "That is the question, one we will now attempt to answer." A new window opened beside the video feed. Team Raxic, subject species, humans. Status, under observation. Duration, 4 cycles. The assignment had begun. Raxic's appendages twitched with excitement as data streams began feeding in from Earth. Diet logs, market analytics, social media food trends. His oculars widened as he saw something called the One-Chip Challenge, featuring humans willingly ingesting lethal dose capsaicin extracts for public entertainment. He turned to Ashari, astonished. "I think they evolved on hard mode." "I think they evolved by accident," she hissed. "And now the galaxy's going to pay for it." Raxic smiled, a rare expression for his species. "Let's find out." Above them, the professor watched silently, already questioning the very definition of poison when applied to Homo sapiens. Spice, spirits, and stimulants. Raxic's first week observing humans had upended everything he thought he knew about biological limits. Inside observation pod 12, he hunched over the holoscreen, antennae vibrating with disbelief. Dozens of human footage reels played in synchronized windows. Kitchens, restaurants, sports bars, nightclubs. Everywhere, they ate and drank with reckless abandon. Eshari floated beside him in a nutrient pod, moaning in distress. Please turn off the Buffalo Wild Wing segment. The one labeled Extra Hot Challenge. I can feel my epithelial layers weeping. I can't, Raxic murmured engrossed. That man's entire digestive system should be liquefied. The human on-screen was red-faced, tears streaming down, but grinning. Scoville units on the readout spiked into territory usually reserved for chemical weapons. This is performance art, right? Eshari asked. No, it's lunch. Their database had flagged over 60 substances deemed toxic or high-risk that humans regularly consumed. Ethanol, caffeine, theobromine, acetic acid, and the ever-mysterious capsaicin. Entire social rituals were built around these chemicals. Footage from a college party showed humans willingly consuming ethanol-based liquids, alcohol, while cheering and singing. Raxic watched one fall over and laugh. His blood alcohol level is near unconsciousness, he whispered. He just called a good buzz, Eshari muttered. Is that a medical term? Raxic didn't respond. He was too busy pulling up cultural archives. Humans had named establishments after the consumption of poison. Bars, pubs, clubs. Their art, their history, their literature. It glorified intoxication and tolerance. In a clip labeled Morning Routine, a human stirred a mug of boiling caffeine solution, coffee, and added sweetener and lactose. He's combining acid, sugar, and unprocessed mammary fluid, Eshari gasped. Why? For nourishment. Raxic shook his head. For wakefulness. He called it essential. He pointed at another clip. Look, this one has a mug that says, "Don't talk to me until I've had my poison." That's a joke, Eshari said, uncertain. Is it? They both stared. Human metabolism baffled them. The liver, it seemed, had evolved a robust enzyme system capable of neutralizing an array of harmful compounds. Gut flora adapted rapidly to new inputs. Even their pain receptors responded strangely, rewarding low-grade chemical burns from spicy foods with endorphin release. A graph appeared showing toxin tolerance across sentient species. Humans were outliers, by a margin so vast it broke Thrinak's bell curve algorithm. By midweek, Raxic had compiled a dossier titled Sublethal Consumption Patterns of Homo sapiens, Intentional Ingestion of Hazardous Compounds. He submitted it to Professor Thrinak. The response came back 2 minutes later. Expand your scope. Explore historical precedents. I want to know how this behavior evolved and why they haven't all died out. So he did. Ancient Earth records showed tribes sampling unknown berries and fungi, often at the cost of their lives. The survivors learned, passed it down, and tried again. Bitterness, pungency, sourness, all once warning signs, became acquired tastes. One text described a fermented fish dish so foul, its smell alone violated 3 galactic air purity codes. Yet humans called it a delicacy. Eshari groaned. How have they survived this long? Raxic scrolled further, wide-eyed. They didn't just survive. They thrived. They turned poison into ritual. Cultural events like Oktoberfest, Cinco de Mayo, and chili eating contests all revolved around ingesting substances most species would consider torture. And it wasn't limited to food. Footage showed a human applying capsaicin extract to their skin for muscle pain relief. They burned themselves for healing, Raxic whispered. Eshari made a whimpering sound and retreated into her pod. On the final day of observation cycle 2, Raxic cued a clip titled Hot Ones, the interview show with hot questions and even hotter wings. It featured a human host calmly asking celebrities personal questions while both consumed wings doused in increasingly volatile spice mixtures. A pop-up warning flashed on Raxic's console. Caution, Scoville rating exceeds 2 million. Do not ingest. He ignored it. He had to see how it ended. The human guest was visibly sweating, gasping, but still smiling. The host leaned in and said, "Feel that? That's life, baby. That's the edge." Raxic sat back in stunned silence. That night, he made his journal entry. Species, human. Classification, carbon-based omnivore with masochistic tendencies. Conclusion, not suicidal, just terrifyingly resilient. Further study required, possibly from a safe distance. Weapons-grade snacks and warrior genes. Professor Threnak stood before the observation console, mandibles clacking as he scanned the report. The numbers didn't lie, but they didn't make sense either. Multiple humans voluntarily consume capsaicin levels exceeding the neurotoxic threshold of a Varnaxian battle slug, the report read. He tapped a claw against the desk. Madness, he muttered. Absolute madness. Raxic and Eshari stood before him, visibly worn from their weeks of observation. They aren't just immune, Raxic said. They're thriving on it. I've compiled a list of substances humans routinely ingest that are considered Category 4 or higher toxins for galactic species. He gestured, and the list projected in the air. Capsaicin, ethanol, caffeine, theobromine, chocolate, acetic acid, vinegar, fermented proteins, nitrites, smoke-flavored meats. Thrinak's iridges twitched. And they survive all this? They don't just survive, Eshari said wearily. They celebrate it. They turn their own biochemical suffering into social bonding. Raxic added, one human described drinking ethanol and waking up with a headache, nausea, and partial memory loss as a good night. Thrinak froze. Memory loss? Raxic nodded. Apparently, temporary brain dysfunction is an accepted side effect of something they call partying. The professor inhaled sharply, which for his species involved expanding his thoracic vents in a high-pitched hiss. We must consider a deeper explanation. Evolution cannot be this careless. Back in observation pod 12, Raxic dove into human evolutionary history. What he found only deepened the mystery. Primitive Homo sapiens scavenged before they hunted. Early food sources included decaying meat, unknown berries, and roots filled with alkaloids. Many of their ancestors died from trial and error. But those who didn't? They passed on unusual digestive traits, enzymes capable of detoxifying mild poisons. Human immunity, it seemed, was forged through generations of chemical roulette. Eshari skimmed through historical records with him. They drank water that wasn't clean. They ate moldy bread. They discovered coffee by watching goats act erratically after chewing beans and thought, let's try that too. Raxic's oculars rotated thoughtfully. It's not recklessness. It's adaptation by adversity. They built their resilience through centuries of exposure. Footage cued next showed a human tribe in the Arctic consuming raw fermented shark meat. Another clip showed tribes in the Amazon preparing a starchy root laced with cyanide precursors, carefully processed through multi-day soaking and drying. They figured out how to disable poisons, Eshari murmured, sometimes without even understanding the chemistry. They don't need to, Raxic said. Their culture evolved to do what biology hadn't yet caught up with. He brought up a montage labeled extreme human foods. There were peppers that triggered pain, so severe they mimicked cardiac arrest. Cheeses with live maggots. Fish that had to be sliced precisely to avoid death. They call this one fugu, Raxic said, a delicacy made from a fish containing a paralytic neurotoxin. One slip with the knife, and it's lethal. Do they outlaw it? Eshari asked, horrified. No, they certify chefs. Eshari pressed a tentacle to her translucent head. These are not survival behaviors. These are rituals of endurance. They treat pain like an achievement. A new hypothesis emerged in Raxic's mind, forming slowly but irresistibly. What if, he said aloud, humans evolved to embrace discomfort? What if exposure to environmental threats became a selection filter, not just for survival, but for dominance? Eshari blinked. You think they use toxins to train themselves? Raxic nodded. Exactly. Like a vaccine. Small doses of suffering to build tolerance. What other species does that? There was silence for a moment. Then Thrinak's voice echoed from the intercom. You're not wrong. The professor's image appeared on the monitor. There's a theory, an old one, that some species may develop aggressive resilience through repeated exposure to adversity. Until now, we lacked a confirmed case. I believe humanity may be the first. But to what end? Eshari asked. Why build a species that can eat poison and call it cuisine? Because, Thrinak said, such a species doesn't just survive. It conquers. It adapts to every environment. And it laughs in the face of danger. He paused. You are to continue your research. Prepare for the summit. Humanity has filed for cultural recognition. They will cater the closing banquet. Both students stared. Banquet, Eshari whispered. With their food, Raxic added. Thrinak nodded grimly. Yes, and we must attend. Raxic turned to Eshari, his voice barely above a whisper. We need stronger stomachs. The banquet. The grand hall of the Celestial Institute gleamed with crystalline symmetry, a structure engineered to impress. Students and faculty from over 60 sapient species assembled beneath the shimmering dome, all gathered for the Galactic Cultural Exchange Summit. But this year, the air buzzed with apprehension, because this year, humans were catering. Professor Thrinak stood near the central dais, his mandibles twitching in uneasy anticipation. Across the hall, Raxic and Eshari hovered near the observation platform, fully enclosed in biosafety suits with built-in filtration units, just in case. They're late, Eshari said nervously, her suit pulsing with a stress biosignal. No, they're dramatic, Raxic replied. It's a cultural trait. And then, as if on cue, a wide panel of the amphitheater wall shimmered open. A human delegation entered, smiling, confident, and pushing carts laden with covered trays, bubbling pots, and strange devices that hissed and smoked. The lead human, a chef named Caitlin, stepped forward and spoke into the translator node. Thank you for having us. Tonight's menu celebrates the diversity of Earth's flavors: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and spicy. The word spicy triggered a wave of nervous chirping and clicking among the audience. A few gelatinous beings quietly slid toward the exits. Let's begin, Caitlin said, uncovering the first tray. Steam rose from a dish labeled buffalo wings, mild. Dozens of students leaned forward. The aroma was complex, warm, smoky, acidic. A reptilian scholar stepped forward. Cautiously, it took a bite. Its forked tongue flicked once. Then again. After a moment, it said, "This is pleasant." Encouraged, others followed. Next came dark chocolate with chili infusion, fermented kimchi, and barbecue ribs glazed with capsaicin honey. Raxic watched in stunned disbelief as beings from across the galaxy sampled what, in any other context, would be classified as Class 3 biochemical threats. One of the molluscoid dignitaries tried the chocolate and promptly passed out. Too much theobromine, Eshari muttered. It was inevitable. Caitlin barely blinked. Don't worry, folks. We got options for all tolerance levels. A new tray was unveiled, ghost pepper curry. A silence fell across the hall. Even the species with no mouths recoiled slightly. Then, to everyone's shock, Professor Thrinak stepped forward. Raxic stiffened. No, he can't. But he did. Thrinak lifted a single spoonful of the curry, his claws trembling ever so slightly. Academic integrity demands full engagement, he said flatly. He ate. 3 seconds later, his thoracic vents flared. His chitin shimmered with internal heat. One of his antennae curled. But he didn't fall. Instead, his mandibles clicked once. It tastes like war. Caitlin grinned. That's the idea. By the end of the banquet, 3 delegates had fainted, 2 had fled, and 1 attempted to detoxify itself by molting. Yet many more stayed, drawn in by the absurd, terrifying resilience of the humans. Raxic approached the dessert table warily. Caitlin handed him a small, dark square labeled Reaper Fudge. It's chocolate, she said. But mean. He stared at it, then turned to Eshari. We've studied them, survived their food logs, analyzed their molecular madness, he said. I think we owe them this. Eshari groaned. Fine. But if I die, you're presenting the final paper alone. They both took a bite. The burn was immediate. A wave of neural pain. Sweetness layered with agony. For a moment, Raxic saw stars. Actual stars. And then endorphins. A rush of alertness. Elation. He gasped. I think I understand now, he said, wheezing. They chased this. The fire. The high. They're addicts, Ashari muttered, eyes watering. Chemical thrill seekers. And they've built an entire culture around it. As the summit drew to a close, Professor Thrinak approached them, his outer carapace still shimmering faintly. You've done well, he said. We have a fuller understanding now. Humanity is not simply reckless. They are resilient by design. They have trained themselves to endure through pleasure. What now? Raxic asked. We approve their cultural admission, Thrinak said, and recommend extreme caution to all planetary diplomats who dine with them. A pause. And perhaps, Thrinak added, we appoint a dedicated xenonutritionist to the Earth delegation. As the humans packed up their food, Caitlin waved at Raxic and Ashari. Same time next year. They both gave cautious nods. Raxic turned to Ashari and whispered, Next time, I'm bringing antacid protocols. Ashari sighed. Next time, I'm bringing a fire extinguisher. And somewhere in the stars, a new galactic reputation was forming, of a species that devoured toxins, danced with fire, and smiled through the burn.